Greetings to one and all. I'm Nagata, professor of second year theology. No human masterpiece has been created without great labor. Andrew Gide, French philosopher. 1st of May, also known as May Day, is celebrated across the globe to honor the Chicago's Haymarket Affair, which took place in 1884. The day commemorates the contributions of workers and labor movement, mainly responsible for legal establishment of 8-hour working day. To honor all the masterpieces that have ever been created with great labor, today we have gathered here to celebrate and honor Labor's Day. Before we begin the program, let us remember our Creator with an invocation from. I would like to call upon Mr. Tejas of Become LLB.
ವಿನಾಯಕ ವಿನಾಯಕ ವಿಘ್ನ ವಿನಾಶಕ ವಿನಾಯಕ 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 ವಿಘ್ನ ವಿನಾಶಕ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಶಂಭು ಕುಮಾರ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಶಂಕರಿ ಪುತ್ರ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಶಂಭು ಕುಮಾರ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಶಂಕರಿ ಪುತ್ರ ವಿನಾಯಕ 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 ವಿಘ್ನ ವಿನಾಶಕ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಬಾಲಗಣಪತೆ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಪರಮ ದಯಾಳು ವಿನಾಯಕ ಬಾಲಗಣಪತೆ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಪರಮ ದಯಾಳು ವಿನಾಯಕ 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 ವಿಘ್ನ ದಯಾಳು ವಿನಾಯಕ 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 ವಿಘ್ನ ವಿನಾಶಕ ವಿನಾಯಕ ವಿಘ್ನ ವಿನಾಶಕ ವಿನಾಯಕ.
Thank you, Tejas. Today we have Professor BABU MATHEW as our guest of honor. And without much ado, I would like my friend Ankita to give introduction of our chief guest.
Good afternoon, everyone. The task of introducing our guest of honor and speaker in this Labor Day celebration is indeed a great privilege to me. I feel elated to introduce Professor Babu MATHEW, Professor of Law, National Law University, Bangalore, on this momentous event. Professor Babu MATHEW was former registrar and faculty at NLSIU. Sir is presently a visiting professor, teaching Master of Public Policy program. Sir was also a part of the trade union movement and various other social movements, taking up issues of bonded labor, child labor, displacement, and destruction of the livelihoods of the marginalized. Sir combined the teaching and the practice of human rights, and during the last 6 years, he served as Country Director of Action Aid International in India. In this capacity, Sir was in charge of evolving a rights-based policy and implementing a human rights agenda which focused on economic, social, and cultural rights in 25 states of India. He led the process of presenting a shadow reporting focusing on the excluded communities of India before the relevant UN committee in Geneva. With this introduction, it is indeed an honor to have you with us today. Now, I request Dr. Mantesh B. Madiwala sir to present a bouquet as a token of gratitude. Thank you.
Now that we are familiar with our chief guest, without any further adherence, I invite Professor Babu MATHEW sir to take up the podium and enlighten us.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be back in this institution. I must say that I've had the privilege of being invited here on a couple of earlier occasions. And so I'm glad to see all of you, so many young faces. And I'm told by those who invited me that somewhere it is linked to the memory of May Day. That is quite unusual and a welcome thing. I say it is unusual because normally people from our background, we included, we are not very close to what happens to the lives of workers. And the May Day is closely connected with the destiny of workers. And so I'm very happy that the institution and those who organized this program thought about May Day and invited me to share some thoughts about the workers' issues in general. And so from that point of view, since we are meeting, a few days after May Day was over, as you all know, is May 1st, which is May Day. And May 1st came to be celebrated across the world. And the most interesting thing about May Day is, for the first time probably in terms of the thinking process, in terms of spreading an idea across the world, May Day played a very important role. May Day is a day of struggle for workers. As you know, that struggle was focused on only one issue, a single issue campaign, a single issue struggle, and that was to have the 8-hour working day. You cannot dissociate May Day from the desire for working people to have 8 hours of working day. And in that context, many of us say that it's a festival of the workers. All of us in our respective communities will have different kinds of festivals. But May Day is a common festival which cuts across your nationality, your social group, your religion, your caste. All those who are workers have been remembering May Day and celebrating May Day. So before I get into more things related to the working people's movement, please notice that I am using an expression which is called working people's movement. In fact, in India, there is now quite a powerful organization which is known as Working People's Coalition. I'll come to that in a minute. But before that, about May Day, I think the very valuable idea that May Day contributed is that one day consists of 24 hours. Nothing new about that. But that 24 hours must be divided into 3 parts. In one part, you may work. In another part, you must sleep. You know from experts that 8 hours of sleep is a very healthy habit. And then you're left with another 8 hours, and that is for recreation, education. So that's where the day is divided into 3 parts. And I think that's a very valuable idea that was contributed by the workers' movement to the world. And around that demand, there has been a large number of experiments, strikes, conventions. And it is for that reason that May Day is very particularly known. When the International Labour Organization was born, and that is in the year 1919, 2 years after the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was 1917. You may be aware of the fact that the Russian Revolution was an earth-shaking event, because for the first time in the history of the world, a new society, a revolutionary society was born on the principle that it will never have capitalism. Capitalism was rejected by the Russian Revolution. That was 1917. And for the Russian Revolution to happen, of course, the thinking of revolutionaries like Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels played a significant role. But the one who actually led that revolution is a person by the name of Lenin. So Lenin led the revolutionary process, overthrew the Tsar of Russia, and established a revolutionary society without capitalism. It's difficult for us to imagine a society without capitalism. The Western world cannot even dream of it. Some third world countries, or some countries that are now described as belonging to the South, the North versus the South, there are people who still ask the question, is capitalism the only way forward? And so it is in that context that the Russian Revolution took place. The capitalist world was very afraid of this idea that you can have a society without capitalism, that you can usher in socialism. So Churchill is said to have remarked that this is a monster that is born in Russia, and that monster should be killed in its cradle. Otherwise, it's likely to become an adult and it's likely to influence other countries of the world. And the idea that there should be no capitalism in one country after another may spread. And therefore, a very clever leader of capitalism, Churchill, he said, you must kill this baby in its cradle. That was the fear at that point of time in different parts of the world. Why am I mentioning it now? I'm mentioning it now because I said to you that in 1919 the ILO was born. And after the ILO was born, the reason why the ILO was born was a realization in the capitalist world that if you continue to exploit workers, if you continue to ignore the demands of workers, if you don't care for their welfare, then maybe the idea which caused the revolution in Russia will spread to other parts of the world. In Germany, it almost happened at that point of time. And I would say, I would subscribe to the view, I think I'm not alone in this idea, that the ILO was born because of the fear that the Russian Revolution may spread. So it took 2 years after the revolution, from 1917 to 1919, ILO was created. And mind you, ILO is the oldest organization which belongs to the International Institution of the United Nations Organization. But you are aware that UN was not born, was born after the Second World War. So ILO was a product of the League of Nations, which was the predecessor to the UNO. And so ILO is the oldest UN agency, because ILO existed even before the UN. And that's its importance. And as a result, there is not a single issue of labor upon which ILO has not deliberated. ILO adopts two kinds of standards. One is a recommendation, which a country may or may not agree. If it wants, it can take those ideas and use it. The other is a convention. Convention has to be voluntarily adopted by a country. It's in the nature of a treaty. And so countries, members of the ILO, will look at particular conventions and then choose to adopt it or to reject it. Why this longish background in the context of thinking of May Day? The reason is the first ILO convention in the world was about 8 hours working day. So that shows the importance of this idea that there should be only 8 hours as the working day for people. And that convention was adopted by India also. India at that time was under British rule, but the British were also part of the ILO system, and so we endorsed it. Very recently, when the 4 new labor codes were made, there was some thinking in the central government that this idea of 8 hours need not be very sacrosanct. and there was an attempt to leave it to every state government. That idea is not yet killed. In Karnataka, it was done very recently. It has not yet received the assent of the president. In Tamil Nadu, also a similar effort started. But on May Day, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu announced that he is withdrawing the proposal to extend the working day through a state amendment. And so they have withdrawn that proposal. Karnataka has not withdrawn it. So they are talking in terms of longer hours of work and including hours of work which may extend into the night for women. And so in Bangalore, the garment workers have come out with strong opposition. It's not easy for a woman to go for work in the night. Those of you who are who have the experience of what happens at home, what does the mother do at home, you will realize that it's not easy for a mother to be part of the family and shoulder all the responsibilities in a patriarchal society, especially, and then expect her to work in the night also. Here it is portrayed as if it's a very welcome reform, and now therefore women can also work. Of course, in society, as society advances, especially I think in the information and technology sector, there are women who like to work perhaps, but provided they are given the necessary security, both in terms of travel and in terms of the workplace. So those are all, in other words, issues related to 8 hours. In India, the Factories Act announced 8 hours work, abolished work for women in the night shift, abolished child labor in factories during the night. So you may be aware of the fact that even now child labor has not disappeared. And that is because it's difficult to change that system through law. But please remember, when the British enact a law, they are serious about it. And as a result of it, when the Factories Act was amended, child labor disappeared in the factories over a period of time. Now, of course, nobody is saying that child labor must be brought back. Of course, it continues. But in relation to women labor, there is an attempt to bring it into force in a manner in which working women, already the number of women who get employment in India has been falling. Post-COVID, that situation has become worse. And against that background, if you add to the difficulties of women, and if you are sympathetic to examine that question, you can't examine it without going into the history of the May Day. So that is the legitimacy for studying more about the May Day. And may I pause at that and proceed to a few more thoughts. Labor law must be studied in context. And the context, as you know, keeps on changing from time to time. And when you say study labor law in context, it's not only labor law. I think every branch of law deserves to be studied in its context. And that is why we talk about interdisciplinary studies. We need to bring other disciplines into the study of a branch of law. Maybe sociology, maybe history, maybe political science, maybe economics, maybe psychology, maybe philosophy. Among lawyers, there is a reluctance to do that. And I think perhaps it is our tribe, the lawyers' tribe, which is inclined not to go into that dimension. That is also the effect of a school of jurisprudence known as positivism, the earliest founders of positivism. And even, I think, the best example of this dimension is Hans Kelsen. He founded the pure science of law. Reflect on that subject matter, on the title of his work, on his jurisprudential thinking, pure science of law. The implication is, if you bring the other social sciences into the study of law, then law becomes impure. And so it's one way of insulating law from society. But all of us know that law is meant in order to change society, in order to engage with society, and therefore to think in terms of doing it without understanding that society. What you can do in India, how can you do anything in India without understanding what is relevant to India? If you want to do something in Pakistan, you should be aware of the reality in Pakistan, or in Nepal, or in Sri Lanka, or in Bhutan. So wherever you are, or if you are in the West, if you are in America, if you are in England, and if you are in America, those societies are different. Therefore, it's a very sad thinking to imagine that you can study law in some pure form. Because we have statutory law, that temptation is even more. If I am to deal with one particular aspect of law, and if that part is covered by a statute, we imagine that that's exhaustive of the subject matter. That's a very foolish thought. You will notice that many statutes have been reinterpreted by the Supreme Court. Why does the court reinterpret it? It's because in the context in which you are raising a dispute, the court has to ask itself, is it valid to give it the same interpretation as what existed at the time at which that law was promulgated? It's a relevant question. And therefore, it is in that context that I would like to mention to you that I want to deal with labor law in that sense. Let me begin with, or rather focus on a few propositions given the limitations of time. The first proposition which I want to attract your attention to, I've already mentioned, but I'll elaborate that a little more. I think in order to be relevant, in order for law to be relevant in the context of India from the labor point of view, it's important to recognize the distinction between who is a worker and who can be described as a working person, as working people. Working person would be the singular and working people would be the plural. Is there a need to distinguish between them? I think so. And one of those who has been propagating that idea, and many listeners and many of those who work with me have agreed with that idea, not without reservations. Let's see in the discussion if you are likely to pick up any reservation. I'm happy to engage with it. What is this difference? One very important difference is in India, the workforce consists of more than 500 million. That's the size of the workforce in India. All those who work for their livelihood, if you count them, that's more than 500 million. Out of that 500 million, a small section of workers are the ones who work in factories. When you go and work in a factory, you receive a wage. And therefore, you become a wage worker, a waged worker. But there is somebody who's selling vegetables on the streets. Nobody pays that woman any salary. She has to go to the market in the morning, buy vegetables at a cheaper price, and sell it from door to door or on the footpath for a higher price. And that price difference, a commercial activity, is what makes her life possible. So she is she a worker? There is difficulty to call that category of people as workers. So they're self-employed. A worker is somebody who has a relationship with an employer. There is an employer-employee relationship. But there are many people who don't have an employer, but yet they are working. In one school of thought, there's a very brilliant idea dealing with exploitation, and that is what is purchased from a worker is his or her labor power. Purchasing labor power is different from purchasing the person himself or herself. If you are born in a slave society, In classical slavery, the owners of the slaves, they purchased the slaves. Slaves would be brought into a marketplace, stand on a platform, half naked, showing their body and muscles, and then they would be open for sale, and there could be an auction. And so different masters who are part of the audience would say, that fellow in the middle, that dark looking chap, I like his muscles, I'm willing to pay him so much. And so he'll be sold for that price after an auction. So what's the difference between that and labor? The difference is that the slave himself is sold. And on that, there was a lot of thinking, slavery got abolished. After slavery got abolished, the work which slaves used to do did not get abolished. That work continued. And therefore, scholars have pointed out that what a capitalist buys is labor power and not the laborer. Every laborer has got within him or her labor power. That's the ability to work. And that is the result of many things. The result of the fact that you are a human being with some intelligence, with muscle power. You eat some food to keep your body going. You relax. You get a certain number of comforts. You go to sleep. So what you sell during the waking hours is your labor power, not yourself completely. So in the life of a worker, the worker always sells his labor power. And in relation to the sale of labor power, there's a very interesting concept, not easy to understand, but please take note of it. And in your mind, if you can register that, you can read a little more about it, and you will be surprised about what kind of new ideas are born from this conversation about labor power. What is that? The idea that you must take note of is something known as surplus value. It's a Marxian idea. It's an idea that was developed by Karl Marx. What does Karl Marx say? That when a worker goes to a factory, let us say his job is to stitch a pair of boots. And when he stitches a pair of boots, let's say it takes 4 hours to produce one set of boots. But he's working for 8 hours. And what the capitalist will pay him is wages which covers only his labor power for 4 hours. But he's worked for 8 hours. He has produced 2 pairs of shoes during that time. But he's being paid only for 1 pair of shoes. So that unpaid part of his labor is what yields surplus value. And that is why Karl Marx calls all those workers as wage slaves. You're not the old kind of slave where you've been sold, but your labor power is available for sale. And that's the reason why it is useful to categorize one category of people as workers. But that doesn't apply to the one who's selling vegetables in the push cart. Nobody is paying her. She doesn't draw wages. She's self-employed. And if you take the totality of the labor force in India, only 7% belong to the organized workforce. Organized both in terms of the economic system as well as in terms of unionization. 93% are not organized. As a result, they are ignored in multiple ways. Ignored even by the trade union, ignored by the government, ignored by labor law. And therefore, if you want to unite all working people, better to call them working people. Don't call them only workers. The combination of working people includes workers, whereas workers does not include the self-employed. Working people is a broader category. Within that you have those who are receiving wages and those who are self-employed. So if you want one expression to cover both of them, it's good to call them working people. Does it have any practical consequence? Is this abstract theory? You may have heard that gig and platform workers are highly exploited. I don't know if you have thought about it. Gig and platform workers themselves are under an illusion that they are about to get a very attractive package. Nothing, never. We've had research with them. We've sat with them like this in a classroom and listened to them and looked at their handheld devices and examined the algorithm. And we have understood from our experience with them that they get less than the minimum wage. But they are not able to calculate and they don't reflect on it. We arrive at that because every gig and platform worker must go and buy a motorcycle. He finds the money for it. He has to then pay the installment on it. And when you keep on running on the motorcycle throughout the day, it doesn't run on water, so you have to put in petrol. And after you run it continuously, there's a breakdown, so you have to give some money for its maintenance. If you deduct all that from the so-called remuneration, we have found that the poor fellows don't even get minimum wage. And then there is this illusion, something called the algorithm. That algorithm is supposed to be automatic and it is artificial intelligence. Using artificial intelligence, they proclaim to the world, we don't even know who's the worker, we don't exploit. But we examined the artificial intelligence and we found them saying, if you complete the 15th delivery, we'll give you an incentive. And that incentive appears to be very important. And then the story is the algorithm which will give you your rides. But we have found as soon as they reach the 14th delivery, then the algorithm refuses to give them the 15th delivery. So they will never get the incentive. But they always promised the moon. So artificial intelligence, please don't fall into the trap of thinking that this artificial intelligence is some neutral empire with benign intentions. No, not at all. Artificial intelligence will behave in the manner in which the creator of that artificial intelligence wants. And since they are created by those who are the aggregators, they exploit. Why am I saying this? The aggregators, they say that there is no worker in gig and platform. They are not workers, they are our partners. And because they are partners, no labor law applies to them. Labor law can apply only to workers. And so this is the divide, the present reality. Everywhere in the world, that argument is being advanced. That gig and platform workers are not workers. Why? Because if you call them workers, then labor law will apply. So in order to facilitate cheaper exploitation of labor, they are called as partners. Very exalted expression of partners. I'm happy to mention to you that quite recently this subject matter went in a dispute. A driver and I think Uber driver took the matter to the Supreme Court of England, and 7 judges sat in order to ask the question, is this Uber driver a worker or not a worker? And unanimously they held the opinion that he is a worker. Like that, many courts have held in favor of the status of a worker. But the controversy is not over. That's another interesting area. If you are all interested in labor law, you must examine it as to what is the characteristic that will legally determine whether a particular person is a worker or not a worker. It's an interesting aspect. I won't get into that. But I must say, on account of this controversy, we decided to draft a law. And in that law, some of us decided that we will not use the expression worker. We'll say any person who is working in the scheduled industries, that person will be covered by this law. Why did we say that? We don't want to fall into the definitional trap. In the Industrial Disputes Act, if you're not working in an industry, the ID Act doesn't apply. If you're not a worker, the ID Act doesn't apply. If you can't create an industrial dispute, then the ID Act doesn't apply. These are all called jurisdictional definitions. The meaning of a particular word will confer jurisdiction in relation to that statute. So we decided that we don't want to fall into that trap. So we won't use the expression gig worker. We'll say a person who is working in the scheduled industries that we have indicated, to that person this law will apply. So get lost. Get lost with the question that you are asking whether he is a worker or a partner. You can call him what you want. But for us, this law will apply. And through that law, we have said you must regulate his working conditions, his working hours, his overtime, his minimum wage, his social security, his incentive system, all that. You have to recognize his trade union. He's going to form a trade union of persons. Please read Article 19. Article 19 is available to all citizens, not just to workers. Therefore, under Article 19, he'll form a trade union, and this is a fundamental right. So it's an interesting way. That's the fun of looking at context. So that idea, I leave to you. Let me see what other ideas I have time to look at. Not much time. Yeah, I'll take up another idea, and that is about unionization. After all, May Day is closely connected with unionization. You may have been told by some friends on some occasion, the one who introduced me and introduced the subject mentioned Haymarket. Haymarket is a place in Chicago where the workers met for the first time in order to begin organizing and demanding 8 hours work. And on that occasion, there was a police firing and many people were killed. May be useful for you to take note of an expression called agent provocateurs. Some people who enter into a peaceful demonstration, a peaceful procession, and the ruling people don't like peaceful processions. So that shows the power of the people. So if you want to disrupt it, you do something in order to facilitate the policeman's entry, in order to facilitate a lathi charge, facilitate tear gas, facilitate firing. Then you can disperse all of that. So peaceful movement is not welcomed very often. And those who get into the procession, they will look like a genuine participant in the procession. And those are called as agents. Agents who are meant in order to provocate. So such people must be identified. May Day is the one which gives you the earliest opportunity to understand who are agent provocateurs, and that's a relevant thing for us to remember. A worker on his own is a very weak person, but a trade union is a powerful organization because many workers come together. So as early as 1864, there was a meeting in London. It was called the Working Men's Association. Sadly, it's a gender-loaded expression. It's not Working People's Association. Women were not many in the workforce at that time, I presume. That criticism apart, Working Men's Association met and they constituted the first international. Because that was the first meeting at an international level of trade unions, especially from all over Europe. They came together. And it was an attempt to bring about an international unity among trade unions. Did that unity happen? What is remarkable about that period is they wanted to know the ideas of different trade unions in order to see whether at the level of ideas there can be unity. Karl Marx was one of the participants in that first international. It came to be called as the First International. And through the process of debate, three trends emerged. Three politico-ideological trends emerged. And those trends, which started almost 150 years ago, those trends continue to manifest itself among trade unions all over the world. If it is a country with some limited amount of democracy and freedom, then you will find that the workers of that place have formed a trade union, not a trade union but many, and you try and find out what is the thinking, then you will find they were influenced by the ideological debate in the First International. I thought that's an interesting idea for me to share with you because it's not commonly spoken about. What are these three ideas? The first one was espoused by the British working class, and it was called as pure and simple trade unionism. What is pure and simple trade? It's a bit like Hans Kelsen's theory. Pure and simple saying the job of the trade union is to organize workers and ask for improving their living conditions, working conditions. That's all. That's the job of a trade union. Don't get into any other questions. And so that, in fact, by implication, those who subscribe to that idea also subscribed to capitalism. Whereas at the other end of the pendulum, of the spectrum, there was another trade union, and that was the socialist trade union. The socialist trade union said, if workers want to have a dignified life in future, you must bring capitalism to an end. It's not enough to fight for your working hours or for your wages or for your social security or for your maternity benefit or for abolishing child labor. That will not give you permanent relief. Permanent relief you can get only if capitalism itself is overthrown. And that kind of thinking influenced the Soviet Union. The birth of the Soviet Union was closely connected with that ideological trend. There was a third ideological trend. In fact, there were four, but I think I'll refer to only three to save some time. And because the fourth is not all that significant, but I'll mention its name. The third one was social democratic trade union. In what way is social democratic trade union different from the first and the second? The first one wanted to overthrow capitalism. The first one wanted to protect capitalism. The second one wanted to overthrow capitalism. Social democracy says, let's borrow from both. Let us see how capitalism can be improved upon. And let's take some socialist ideas and bring it into society. So that's the social democratic idea. There's a long history of social democrats. That itself can occupy 1 week of trade union classes. Sometimes we do that. But the essence of it is, it's not overthrowing capitalism per se, and it is borrowing some principles of socialism, meaning better life and living conditions for workers. Robert Owen is a famous personality you should read about if you want to understand about social democratic movements. There are many social democratic thinkers, but I think for our purpose it's sufficient for you to take note of the fact that Indian trade unions belong to the social democratic variety. India itself is a social democratic society. The Constitution of India gave us a framework which is a social democratic framework. I'm not saying it continues, I'm saying that is what it was. And during that time, the trade union that followed that school of thought supported it. Of course, in India, you also had those who subscribed to socialism in the sense in which it existed in Soviet Union. Those were the communist-led trade union. And they had a greater influence in Indian working class movement than the ones who believed in social democracy. Nehru gave birth to a trade union after he became prime minister, and that trade union is known as the Indian National Trade Union Congress, INTUC. The earlier one, in which the left thinking had more importance, was called the AITUC. So the INTUC believed there's no need to overthrow capitalism. We can modify capitalism. In the Avadi session of the Congress Party, 1951, they adopted socialistic pattern of government. Socialistic pattern is different from socialism. The classical definition of socialism, even if you don't remember anything else from my lecture, please take note of this. It's a useful thing to add to your knowledge and for your further inquiries into the subject matter. What is the difference between utopian socialism and scientific socialism? Scientific socialism is what Karl Marx believed in, Friedrich Engels subscribed to it, Lenin put it into practice and completed the revolution. What is the ideological idea? The idea is there shall be no private ownership over the means of production. Underline that and remember. That is scientific socialism. Factories, agricultural land cannot be owned by private individuals. If there is private ownership, that is not scientific socialism. In a sense, Ambedkar subscribed to it. Ambedkar was of the opinion that both land and factories in India must be nationalized. Gandhiji, of course, was different from all of them. So his famous statement is, Sabhi Bhumi Gopal Ki. All land belongs to God. So don't fight about whether it is private ownership or public ownership. That was his clever position. And he, along with that, started the trusteeship method. Nehru said there must be private property, but no landlordism. There must be land reforms. So, zamindari system was abolished. Ceiling limit on landholding was brought into force. Tenancy reform, land to the tiller came in, and the agricultural workers were given homestead land. Was it implemented in India? Implemented in 3 states: Kerala, West Bengal, Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir, not for ideological reasons, but it was felt that if you want to prevent Pakistan from having too much of an influence, better make the people who live there at least owners of the land. So anyway, they got that benefit. Otherwise, in the rest of the country, there was no such ownership. So there's a second idea. I had in my notes about 4 ideas, but I noticed that the clock is now 1:30, and so I'll stop here. And maybe on some other occasions, maybe for the next May Day, I'll come back and continue if all of you are interested in the subject matter. Now let me stop and invite questions, comments, discussion over to the organizers.
If you have any questions, the dais is open.
Sir, sir, my question to the prohibition of child labor. If both the parents are not able to go and work, the child is below 14 years. So, is there any provision the child go outside the home and work and provide the bread to the family? This is the issue, and other related to the child labor part.
Yes, the child labor law has been amended. After amendment, it now refers to adolescents also. There is a category of children who belong to the adolescent age group, as 15 to 18. It was already there in the Factories Act. And so the new law says absolute ban of child labor for those who are below 14, with one exception. And that exception is if you are working with your parents or close relations, and if it does not come in the way of your education, then that is permitted to a very limited extent. Otherwise, total ban. As far as 15 to 18 are concerned, there is regulation of child labor. How to allow them to work under regulated conditions. But I think we must always look at the child labor question in the context of the right to education law, free and compulsory education law. You are aware that Justice Jeevan Reddy, in the famous case laid down that any person, any child in India who is within the age group of 15, belonging, you can complete, if you calculate it in terms of age up to 8th standard, from 0 to 8th standard, a child has fundamental right to education. That's because Article 21 was reinterpreted by Justice Jeevan Reddy. He said right to life includes life with dignity. And if you want dignity, then you must give education. And therefore, education became a fundamental right. Till then, it was a directive principle. And as a result, you have this new law which gives right to fund. So, if you really believe that children should be in school, then how can you say that some children can go to work? That's a contradiction. And hopefully, at a future date, at least, children should be allowed fundamental right to education up to 12th standard, not 9th standard, up to 12th standard. And therefore, up to that age, there should be prohibition of child labor and free and compulsory education should be given. If you want to go into the world of artificial intelligence, let our citizens at least be educated up to 12th standard.
Yes, any questions?
Don't hesitate among the things that I mentioned. If you have any doubts, comments, agreements, disagreements, you are welcome. Yes, please.
So, this is not a question. I just wanted to speak on utopian socialism because
Okay.
scientific socialism is what we know as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. He has put it into, he has explained it in science, like how what is labor, like he's classified into it, how wages are calculated and all of that. But I wanted to talk on utopian socialism.
Yes. Yes, that's a vast area, but I must happily mention to you one publication of a Marxist variety, which is easy to read and understand, is a writing by Engels, which deals with from utopian socialism to scientific socialism. So it's Engels who gives a very detailed explanation. It's not a very thick text. I think you can find it on the Google. Worth going to the Google and looking at that. It's not easy for me with a few minutes to get into it, but the essence of it is what I mentioned. That scientific socialism means no private ownership over the means of production. All varieties of utopian socialism, there can be private ownership over the means of production. Robert Owen was somebody who set up a place called New Lanark, and there he set up a factory. And in that factory, all the best principles were implemented. Nobody could be denied education. There would be no night work. There would be decent wages. So, under utopian socialism, also you can have improvement of life, but that will be confined to an island. You must read a book by Thomas More, and that book also deals with these ideas. Thomas More has a dream of setting up a society with a difference in an island. What you can't do on the mainland, you have a temptation to go and try it in an island. ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಸಿರು ಕುದುರು ನಾರ್ತ್ ಕ್ಯಾನಡಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ದ್ವೀಪ ಇದೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಬಹಳ ವಿಶೇಷವಾದ ಅಂಶ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೂ ಸಹ ಅವ್ರು ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಎದ್ದೇಳುವಾಗ ದೇ ಗಿವೆನ್ ಸ್ವೀಟ್ ಟಾಡಿ, ನೀವು ಕುಡಿಬಹುದು, ಟಾಡಿ ಕುಡಿಬಹುದು ನೀವು. ಅದೊಂದು ಐಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಆದ ಕಾರಣದಿಂದ ಆ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಇನ್ನೂ ಉಳಿದಿದೆ. ಮೇನ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರೀಮ್ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಕಂಡುಬಿಟ್ಟು ಶುರು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ಅಡ್ವಾಂಟೇಜ್ ಐಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ.
Regarding unionization, what you spoke about. In US and other European countries, these days we see a trend that the working class is given an option to be part of the union. So if that concept is brought to India, how would it affect the labor rights or the perspective on that one?
No, all of us have always subscribed that freedom of association includes the right to join or not to join. If you don't want to join, you can't call it freedom. It becomes compulsory unionization. So that is, of course, in England for a short period of time, they had something called the closed shop. And the closed shop meant that the trade union would decide who must come into employment. If you did not become a member of the trade union, then you may not be given a job. And that used to be called as closed shop. But that didn't succeed very much. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Sir, my question is: Are IT workers, IT employees, are considered as workmen or?
Yes, yes. So now you have a strong union in Karnataka and many parts of India. IT employees and IT enabled employees. They are trade unions. In the past, let's say 5 years ago, they would feel that it is below their dignity to inquire about labor law. Now it is not so. They invite me quite often for lectures on labor law. So when you begin to lose your job, that is when you become aware of workers' rights. If you have no job loss and a good salary, then you're not bothered about workers' rights. But when there's retrenchment, layoff, closure, loss of employment, then you begin to find out what does labor law have to say for me. And they are now getting more and more interested in labor law. There's quite a strong trade union in Bangalore of IT and IT enabled employees.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So, what is your view? Is capitalism or communism good for the society?
Yeah. I'm somebody who would think that social democracy is a good idea. And so I'm not in favor of unlimited laissez-faire system. You know, the first law of capitalism is competition. And what is competition? The big fish will swallow the small fish. And from out of that grows monopoly capital. Adam Smith himself says there is no such a thing as a perfect market. What's the imperfection? The biggest imperfection is the rise of monopoly. So if you leave capitalism to itself, it will produce monopoly. In India, who are the monopoly capitalists?
No.
Thanks to Adani, all of us now know who is a monopoly capitalist. Ambani is also not very different. In the older days, it used to be Tata and Birla. They are also still monopoly. Whenever monopoly develops, there is concentration of power. Hitler came to power in the Weimar Republic through the economic process of cartelization. In cartelization, many small industries come together, merge, and become a bigger industry, and finance capital flows into it. And that is what Hitler had tremendous influence over arms manufacturing, over what are the others? Cement, engineering, and the 3 or 4 such big industry monopolies. They support Hitler to finance his coming into power. And chemical industry was very important for the growth of fascism. The chemicals that they produced, including gas chamber, was famous theme of Hitler. Dachau is a place where there was a torture chamber, and this chemical industry produced the stuff that was necessary for torturing and killing people. So there's an unholy relationship between monopoly capital and fascism. And that is a worthwhile subject for further inquiry. There are good articles and research material about it, especially when it started in Germany, the Americans opposed it. But when Germany went down, when Germany was defeated in the Second World War, then the Americans started diluting their antitrust law. And slowly now in America, you have the growth of monopoly. So that's an important thing for us. Employment gets reduced. You know, Pina Industrial Estate was one of the biggest industrial estates in Asia. There were thousands and thousands of small factories with employment for so many workers. But when you bring in monopoly capitalism, that gets destroyed. And when you close down the public sector, it becomes worse. So that's the current Indian scenario. There's a political economy of Indian capitalism is a subject by itself worth inquiring. So I'm ready to be here, as long as you have questions, but the organizers must decide when to call it up. Please ask.
The non-standard workers labor regulations ಅಷ್ಟು ರೆಗ್ಯುಲೇಟ್ ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಅಪ್ಲಿಕಬಲ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರ ರೈಟ್ಸ್ ಪ್ರೊಟೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ನಾವು ಹೌ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ವಿ ಪ್ರೊಟೆಕ್ಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಹೌ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ವಿ ಅಡ್ರೆಸ್ ದೀಸ್ ನಾನ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್
ನಿಜ ತಾವು ಹೇಳ್ತಿರೋದು ನಿಜ. ಅದಕ್ಕಿರೋ ಪರಿಹಾರ ಏನಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾನ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ಎಂಪ್ಲಾಯೀಸ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ವಿಶೇಷವಾದ ಕಾಯ್ದೆ ತರಬೇಕು. ಈ 4 ಹೊಸ ಕಾಯ್ದೆಗಳು ಬಂದಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ, 5ನೇ ಕಾಯ್ದೆ ತರಬೇಕು. 5ನೇ ಕಾಯ್ದೆ ಏನಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾನ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ಗೆ. ಅದು ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಾ ನಾನ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ವರ್ಕರ್ಸ್ಗೂ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ತರದ ಕಾನೂನು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ತರಬಹುದು, ನಮಗ್ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದದು. ಆದ್ರಿಂದ ಅದನ್ನ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ವಿಲ್ ಸಿಕ್ಕೋದು ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ.
Since you mentioned Hitler, there's an unholy nexus between monopolistic capitalism and fascism. It is of the view that Stalin did more harm to the world than Hitler. How do you justify this?
Yeah, basically I agree with you. Not agree with the proposition as to who did more harm. Both of them did enough harm, and both of them used the same mechanism. Stalin had the concentration of industrial power, which was owned by the Soviet state. So that power he used. But Stalin became famous because he defeated Hitler. As a result, Stalin's bad name is less known in the world than Hitler's bad name. Hitler carried out all kinds of torture in chambers, etc. Stalin was also a dictator with no limit. 90% of those Central Committee members who worked along with Lenin for the revolution were killed by Stalin. So he is also a dictator. The similarity is in both you have concentration of economic power. One gave rise to fascism, the other gave rise to Stalinism. That's why social democracy is a little better.
Sir, one last question.
Yes, sir.
Sir, ಇದು ಲೇಬರ್ ಲಾ ವೈಲೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಆದಾಗ ಅದು ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಆದಂತ ಕಾಂಪನ್ಸೇಷನ್ ಪೆನಾಲ್ಟೀಸ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಂಪ್ರಿಸನ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು ಅಷ್ಟು ಎಫೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಲೇಬರ್ ಲಾ ವೈಲೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಲೀಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರು
ಯಾವುದು
ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಪೆನಾಲ್ಟೀಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಪನಿಷ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ಗಳು ಲೇಬರ್ ಲಾ ವೈಲೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಕೊಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಎಫೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಷ್ಟು. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಫೈನ್ಸ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಮಿನಿಮಲ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಇಂಪ್ರಿಸನ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಮಿನಿಮಲ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಇದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ವೈಲೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಲೀಡ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಡುತ್ತಲ್ಲ.
ನನ್ನೊಂದು ಫೇವರೇಟ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇದೆ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟಿರೋ ಹಾಗೆ, ಅದನ್ನ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷಲ್ಲೇ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ದಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಲೇಬರ್ ಲಾ is directly proportional to the extent of unionization. ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಗಟ್ಟಿಯಾದ ಸಂಘ ಇರುತ್ತೋ ಲೇಬರ್ ಲಾ 100% ಇಂದ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಈಗ ಬೋನಸ್ ಆಕ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮ್ಯಾಕ್ಸಿಮಮ್ ಬೋನಸ್ 20%. ಯೂನಿಯನ್ ಬಹಳ ಗಟ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿದ್ದು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಲಾಭ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಾದ್ರೆ 30% ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಯೂನಿಯನೈಸೇಷನ್ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಲೇಬರ್ ಲಾ ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಅದು ಸ್ವಪ್ನ.
These days, politicians, judges, and journalists, they seem like agents to the bourgeois, the capitalist society. You comment on it?
Yes, unfortunately, that is the increasing trend. Not everybody is sold, but more and more are being sold. Sold andre not in the commercial sense, sold intellectually. Commercial is there. Prashant Bhushan had the courage to say that 8 Supreme Court judges are guilty of corruption. ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರ ಫೋಟೋಗ್ರಾಫು ಪೀರಿಯಾಡಿಕಲ್ ಕವರ್ ಪೇಜ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂತು. ಯಾರು ಅವ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಕಂಟೆಂಪ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ಹಾಕಿಲ್ಲ. ಕಾರಣ ಕಂಟೆಂಪ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ಮತ್ತು ಡಿಫಮೇಷನ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇರೋ ಡಿಫೆನ್ಸ್, ಇಫ್ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಪ್ರೂವ್ ವಾಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಟ್ರೂತ್ ದೆನ್ ದಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಅ ಡಿಫೆನ್ಸ್. ಅದರಿಂದ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಬಾಯಿ ಮುಚ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರು ಸುಪ್ರೀಂ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ಜಡ್ಜಸ್.
Thank you so much, sir, for enriching us with your knowledge. We are deeply privileged. As the program comes to an end, I would like to call upon my friend Bharat to propose vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. It has been an honor to be a part of this wonderful and insightful session. On behalf of this institution, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Babu Matthew, Professor of Law, NLSIU Bangalore, for enlightening us on contemporary perspectives and challenges in labor sector. Importance of May Day, sacrosanctness of 8-hour workday, labor power and surplus value theory, gig and platform workers' perspectives, and unionization and agent provocateurs. These are some of the perspectives that we learned in this session. Thank you very much, sir. It was an honor to have you with us today. Sincere thanks to our principal, Dr. J. Mallikarjunaya, for the constant support to such academic activities. A wide range of applause to the cultural committee and its coordinator, Dr. Sunita ma'am, and Dr. Mantesh sir, member of the cultural committee, for arranging this special lecture for the benefit of students. I would also like to thank our teachers for their gracious presence. Finally, I would like to thank all of the student community who are present here and for making time to be part of this guest lecture. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Bharat. Genius begins great work. Labor alone finishes it. Joseph Churchill. Finishing up the program, thank you everyone for your presence and patience.
Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir.
However, those of you who have consumer law assessment should stay back. Not here.